Now then, team. In this episode, I have a chat with Lisa Barry. Lisa is a leadership consultant and a coach and does a bunch of work with the Centre for Charity Effectiveness at Bayes University. So in this episode, we talk about the transformative power of coaching. We talk about good leadership and bad leadership and how we've probably all experienced a bit of both. We talk about the need for emotional intelligence and self-awareness in leaders. We talk about maintaining well-being in high-pressure roles. And we talk about having a coaching culture in organisations. So grab a brew. Hope you enjoy the conversation. See you in a bit. Lisa, welcome to Causes.
Hi, Dave.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Great. I'm very excited to have you on. This feels like quite a special episode because we've worked a little bit together.
Yeah, we have. Me too. I've been looking forward to it a lot.
Amazing. So we're going to start as we start every episode, a 1 minute intro, holistic, take this in any way you'd like. Who is Lisa?
Okay. So I suppose the way I would describe myself initially professionally is a coach, a facilitator, a learning professional, somebody who's really passionate about leadership particularly, and leadership in the charity sector, in the voluntary sector particularly, somebody who really is very curious and interested about humans. I'm a business psychologist, so very nosy about work, human, and all that's to do with that, really.
Amazing. And what's your connection with the charity sector? Can you talk about charity sector moments?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So I've most of my career has been in the charity sector. It started actually as a volunteer. So I was a volunteer for quite a number of years when I finished university because I was really interested in counselling, and I wanted to be a psychologist, a clinical psychologist. So I went in and did a lot of work on a volunteering basis in many charities and did quite a lot of volunteer management as well. Then I worked in the NHS and in the public sector in the skills and education field, but kind of always staying in the not-for-profit sector. And my background's all in human resources after that, and learning and development really is I would say, my field. I was in a charity as head of learning and development for 15 years, which sounds like it probably felt like a really long time, really immersed in one organisation, I would say. And then the last couple of years, I have gone out on my own. I'm now a consultant. I do a lot of associate work, and I am building up my own consultancy, particularly focusing on leadership coaching in the voluntary sector.
Amazing. What is it about leadership and coaching that is interesting to you?
Yeah, so let's take them both one at a time, although they're very intertwined, I think. So in terms of coaching, I know this sounds really quite extreme. I think it's magic. I think you get moments of magic in coaching. To coaching, for those, I think most people are familiar with the concept of coaching. For those who don't know that much about it, it's really a relationship between two people, between a coach, a trained coach, and an individual. And that individual is bringing some potential challenges or questions or curiosity or something they'd like to work on. So there's usually some goals in the conversation. I describe it as facilitated learning based on questions and listening, and providing and promoting ways of gaining some self-awareness and taking some personal accountability. So we use questions a lot in coaching, and I think that's where the magic comes from me. Sometimes the power of just asking a question or just giving somebody the space to really think, because we just don't get that in our lives, particularly not in our professional lives very much. So for me, it's about being able to give that gift space to think, and just giving people some different perspectives by asking questions and exploring. And then I guess the bit about leadership. I mean, I've been a leader, a middle manager in an organisation for a long time. You know, we've all got experience of great leaders, of not so good leaders. I think the thing for me about leadership is that leaders impact everything in organisations. And I think there's two ways of thinking about leadership. One of them for me is we're all leaders. We all have elements of personal leadership in our roles, and not just at work, as human beings. I think there's a lot about leadership that is about being a good human being, being the best human being that you can be, both for yourself and for other people. And then I think organizationally, leaders just have so much impact. And in our sector, we're very values driven, we're very causes driven. It's really the impact that people have. And I think being able to show up and be the best leader that you can be for other people is just amazing. And I don't think we spend enough time focusing on that.
Brilliant. So let's split I've actually, on my notes over here, I've split the two as well.
Okay.
What do you think separates a sort of an average coach? So we'll start with coaching from an exceptional one.
Oh, okay. Wow, that's a question. So I think there are so many different approaches to coaching and to being a coach. And I think one of the things I've been thinking about a lot recently is coaching. It's really important, I think, to be trained. I think qualifications and accreditation, professional standards are very important because there's all sorts of things around dealing with another human being and where you take them around ethics and just being aware of the impact that you have that are really important. So process, massively important. And I think training is something that we really should be giving attention to in coaching. But the other side of it, that it feels probably more important to me, is about, as an individual, as a human being, how are you showing up in that relationship with that other person and giving the best of you and the best of your skills and your knowledge and your training and the space that you create and the way that you are to that other person. So how am I as a human being impacting on this other human being and giving them the best opportunity to explore whatever it is that's in front of them? So there's something, I hope that doesn't sound too woolly, but for me, that's what really separates being a great coach and an average coach. And I'm a little bit uncomfortable about just using that terminology because I think everybody who trains to be a coach and who's got that aptitude and understands the impact of it and is able to use those skills, I think can be a great coach. Yeah. But I think that's the key for me, is about what are you as a human bringing to this and what does that look like? So that thing about that capacity about self-reflection and self-awareness, and how do I do all the work and ask these questions and give that person the space in service of what they want, not what I want, not what I think should happen.
Yeah. I think maybe I framed the question. I love questions. I love talking to somebody who also loves questions. I wonder if there's just a sort of my competitive spirit is in that average, exceptional question.
I think it's a good question, Dave, because I think some of what coming to coaching is about how can I be exceptional? How can I be as exceptional as I possibly can be? So I don't think there's anything wrong with that, and I think this is a lovely sort of almost playful way of playing out how coaching can work, because I could ask a question that just doesn't quite feel right. We might explore that together and think, well, that wasn't the right question, but actually that's taken me over here. That might be a helpful place to go, but is this where you really want to go? And should it be a different question?
Yeah. Can I ask you a meta question about questions, which is why do you, or what is the magic in asking the right question?
The magic is, there could be so many different kinds of magic, so many different moments of magic. I think thinking about my own experiences of being coached and as a coach, it's actually allowing the space and silence when something is just unlocking for somebody. So I think often just a really open, curious question, or a really insightful question that you think, this is what's going on for them. We've talked about this. We know where they want to go. Let's see what this question does for them. So maybe it's a question that gives somebody the opportunity to look at something that they can't see that's right in front of them. And I could go on probably for several days talking about other magical questions, but there's something for me about that thing about what's in front of you what are you focusing on, but what else is around here? And that's where questions can take you.
Yeah. What misconceptions about coaching do you think exist?
So I remember asking somebody once, just to understand what their understanding of coaching was. And I think that the definition that they came back with, and I think this is possibly a bit of a common one, is that coaches ask questions knowing what the answer is going to be. So we have the knowledge, we have the answers, and we're asking questions to pull what we know out of that individual. And that's absolutely not what it's about. One of the main principles and philosophy behind coaching is that we all, as human beings, are amazingly capable, and we have that knowledge in our heads a lot of the time. We just don't get the opportunity, for whatever reason, to have the space and time to think about it, or the opportunity just to have, as I described a minute ago, just something unlocked. So I think that's one misconception, is that we know the answers and we're in control. We're steering. We might be steering the conversation a little bit by making sure that we're reaching goals for that person and asking questions that are taking them somewhere. But the whole philosophy is that the people that we're coaching have the answers somewhere. And I think another thing, there's often a misconception or misalignment between people's understanding of coaching and mentoring. And I'd say that the main differences there are coaching is normally, as I've described, is client-led. It's using questions. Usually there is an agreement. Usually it's two people, but of course we will coach teams, etc. And sometimes there might be some support from the manager as well. So there might be a three-way relationship somewhere in there. Mentoring is normally, I suppose the other thing with coaching is often coaching is paid. So it's more of a learning intervention in that way. Whereas mentoring is somebody who has got, say, sector or technical expertise and knowledge that they are passing on. So that it's advice giving, it's information giving. It's that, assumption that person has probably more experience and knowledge of that area that they're mentoring somebody else in, which is different, of course, from coaching in the way that I've described it. So I think that might be another misconception about it. And I guess one more thing is that, we do talk a lot about executive coaching. I talk of myself as an executive coach. That's my training. But I think coaching is applicable to everybody. I think my view is everybody in the world could be benefited by coaching. Coaching can change the world. So I think, it's not just for leaders. It's not just for a specific profession or technical expertise or somebody who's in that position. I think coaching benefits anybody.
How do you think, if everybody overnight sort of woke up tomorrow and they were an amazing coach just by default without training, how does the world change?
I think we'd have a lot more capacity for self-awareness and understanding and awareness of the impact that we have on other people. I think we would be able to make better decisions and consequently actions, because we would be able to spend more time really thinking. So, the quality of our thinking, or the quality of our actions, really does depend on the thinking that we've been able to do beforehand. So I think good decisions, more understanding and empathy and awareness of other people and of the impact that we have on others. I'm not going to start talking about, world peace and the global economy and all of that stuff. But in terms of just us as individual basic human needs, I think it would change a lot. It does change a lot.
Amazing. What's the most transformative coaching moment that you can remember being part of?
So I'm going to talk about me being coached, if that's okay. And I suppose it was the first coach that I had. I've had a few amazing coaches, a couple of really incredible coaches. The first coach I had was actually the person who helped me uncover what it is that I really, really want to do with myself and where I feel I'm most comfortable and most strong and have the best impact, which is being a coach, which is working with people in this way. And he just really helped me to spend some time. We talked about the concept of flow. So when you're in that place where you're doing something that just feels so natural and so amazing that you don't even know that you're doing it, you don't have to put the effort in. You don't have to draw on all the skills and knowledge and try to remember stuff, because it's just happening naturally. And doing that work with him, as well as thinking about the things that I stumble over, the things where I get in my own way, the things that, the imposter moments that we all have, which I have so many of. I'm having one now. He really helped me with those two things. Where am I best placed? Where can I be most useful in the world? And how do I stop getting in my own way a bit? Amazing. And sometimes it was just through letting me talk and think out loud.
One of the things that, I might get it, this might be more of a, I don't know if this falls into leadership or coaching, I guess, or both, but and one of the things I'll ask later is about sort of models of, frameworks and models. But one of the things that I learned through you is the box, this idea of the box on the table. That for me is a very, very powerful thing that I've used countless times since. I wondered if you could explain this for people.
Yeah. Okay. So the box, when we talk about the box in this way, we're talking about two people who are having a conversation, and the box is in front of them, and the box it belongs to one individual. The box has been put on the table by this individual. And the person who is on the other side, who is having that helping conversation with the other person whose box it is, really wants to open the box and tell them what's in it and tell them what to do with it. But it's not their box. It's not that the stuff that's inside the box isn't theirs. So the whole point of this conversation, the box metaphor, is it's helping that person who owns the box to open it up and uncover what's in there and dig around in it and figure out what to do with it. So it's about not touching the box. Did I explain that as well as you remember it?
Yeah.
Good.
For me, it's like it's a sort of a metaphor for, you might really want to open the box and help the person with their box, but you can't, because that's the whole point. That was really. So I mean, we'll come on to the models, but
okay.
That's really stuck with me. Are there any? I mean, sort of a segue to skills and techniques. Are there any skills or sort of specific skills or techniques that you believe sort of every coach must be a master of?
Yeah, I think there probably are. And I think just drawing on that box metaphor a little bit more, I think that, again, going to a misconception, it's not that coaching is always the right approach, because actually sometimes people need us to help them, to guide them, to give them some advice and direction, or, our own expertise and experience and knowledge. Sometimes that's good. So sometimes actually the right thing to do together with agreement is to open the box. And sometimes even in coaching, we would do that. But we would do that with agreement if we've contracted to do that, and if it's in line with the goals that person wants. So sometimes advice and opening the box is the right thing to do. Coaching, I think what I'm saying is coaching isn't always the right thing. So I think there's something in that around understanding your role and the parameters of your role, and having a really clear, we generally call it contracting, a really clear agreement, and recontracting, making sure that we're talking about, is this where you want to go? Is this in service of your goals? So I think that's one thing. I think confidentiality and some of the obvious stuff around ethics is really, really important. People will come to coaching with some really difficult stuff. And we're encouraging people to be vulnerable. That's one of the benefits of coaching. So I think there's something about being really careful around confidentiality, around care for that other person, about not taking them anywhere where they don't feel comfortable going. So all of that, I think, is really important. I think recognizing your own limitations, I think, is a really important one. So often when we train as coaches, there is usually some emphasis on what is coaching, what is counselling, what is therapy, what are the difference between those, and knowing when you don't step in, knowing what you're focusing on is coaching, and when to refer on or to talk about what the other options would be for that person. So knowing your sort of your limitations and the parameters that you're working within. And then I think there's the whole thing about presence. So a lot of coach training is around, what's your model of coaching? What do you bring to coaching? You are an instrument and a tool. So there's so much about just how you are in that relationship and the importance of that relationship, because we'll usually have what we call a chemistry session before somebody chooses a coach. And sometimes it just doesn't work. Sometimes there's the right coach for everybody. But some of us aren't all the right match. So there's something about recognizing that, and the relationship is so important. There's many other things I could talk about. I'd say those probably are some key ones.
What are the, if somebody is seeking a one-to-one coach, what do you think are the sort of the things to look out for in terms of, I want to find a coach, I should be focused on finding somebody who does X, Y, and Z kind of thing. Would you give any advice around how to find the right coach for you?
Yeah, there's a lot of coaches out there and a lot of amazing coaches. I think there's a number of things I would recommend. I think word of mouth and recommendation, you just can't beat it. I think so. If there is, and there's usually somebody who will know somebody, isn't there? Particularly in our world, in our sector, I think that there's usually a way of getting some access to people by recommendation. I think there are some really good companies and organisations where you can find a coach. So, for example, I do associate work with the Centre for Charity Effectiveness, where you came and did a programme with us. I think we've got some great coaches there. So often going through an organisation or a company that provides coaching services is a good way of doing it. I do think qualifications and accreditation are important. So if it was me choosing a coach, I would choose somebody who did have some training and understand that. I think the most important thing, though, is that initial conversation and just talking through and understanding, what that person's background is, what their approach would be, what their training accreditations are, how you would work together. And just, you do have to be comfortable with going with that gut feeling that this is a really important relationship. And if it doesn't always work, and that's fine. We have that conversation, and there's somebody else always out there, to work with. So there's probably a load of other things I'm not remembering to mention, but those I'd say are some key pieces of advice I'd give.
Yeah, that's really useful. Flipping it out, flipping it on its head, for somebody who might be listening who is interested in making the sort of same move that you've made, who has been in the sector, who's maybe had experiences of being coached by great people, what advice would you give to people who are interested in being a coach?
Yeah. So I'll talk a little bit about my experience and my journey, because that's how I've got here. So I think training is obviously really important, and I think there's lots of great training programs out there. It's not cheap generally to become a qualified coach, so I think there are often really good taster sessions or introductory courses. So I think if you haven't done anything like that, I would definitely go down that route. First of all, a lot of organisations will have internal coaches or internal coaching programs, or the learning and development or OD function, or whoever, if they have one, will often be aware of coaching and coaches. So there might be some opportunities internally. That's kind of how I got started. My background's in L&D. I introduced coaching. I trained as a coach while I was in the organisation, and we trained people to be coaches and developed a coaching culture. And then I was lucky enough to get some support to do a training programme. And so my route was really much more around the internal coaching approach and coaching people and training people internally. Becoming an independent coach, there's so many routes and there's so many different resources you can go through, and I'm always happy to share some resources. So I'm really happy for people to contact me, or we can share resources in whatever way is appropriate. There's some great organisations out there. There are people in our field, I would say generally, are so generous and kind with their time and their experience. So I'd find some coaches to talk to about what their experience was. And then in terms of actually just being able to start working as a coach, if you are looking at working independently, the way that the route that I'm going through initially is to work with several organizations as an associate, and then I'm starting to build up my coaching independently. It's the same as anything when you're self-employed. It takes a while. It's a lot of work. It's connections. It's opportunities. There's lots of sort of networks and training that I get access to that builds up that experience and those opportunities. So those are some of the bits of advice I would give.
Great. Let's go on to the sort of second half, which is the leadership. The leadership stuff. Bold question that I'm asking everybody is, what is good leadership?
Oh, there's a question, Dave. I think for me, the most important, if there's one important thing, it is about self-awareness or emotional intelligence. So being aware of our own emotions and being able to regulate them, and being aware of how that impacts on our behavior and how that impacts on other people, being aware of other people's emotions and behavior, and thinking about relationships. So being really self-aware, I think, is a cornerstone of good leadership. I mean, I've obviously done a lot of work in this space. There are so many things I could list off, but that would be my number one. And I know it sounds cliched, and I've talked about this a bit already. It's just about being a good human being. So how can you be the best you can be for the people that you are responsible for or work with? And I think also for us, particularly in our sector, how do we keep that North Star for our organisations? So how is what we are doing, and how is what we are supporting and engaging with and communicating and leading other people in service of our organisations meeting what we're trying to do, what we're aiming to do. I think there's a lot about self-care. I think that's a really important one. And I think we're thinking about that a lot more than we used to, because, it's that old cliche of, if you don't put on your own oxygen mask first, you can't help other people. So I think there's something about being really aware of how we look after ourselves and avoiding burnout and not falling over, because, what happens to other people if we're not there. I'm going to stop there, but I've got more if you want me to draw on them.
That's great. Let's dive into a couple of bits there. One of the things that, I mean, maybe it's so it's personal in terms of me wanting to crack this, but the protecting your well-being, avoiding burnout. Do you have any advice for people who might be in? Yeah, some of the people who've been on the show are humanitarian leaders who are responding to crises at all hours, kind of thing.
Yeah.
How does somebody in a pressurized role where there might be life and death decisions being made, how do they protect themselves?
So I think there's a number of things that in research that I've done and other research and in our experience of working with leaders that comes up time and time again. And I think one of them is the power of your community and connection. So recognizing, being a leader, particularly being a chief executive, I think can be a really lonely role. So making sure that you are accessing the resources that are around you. And often that will be right in front of you. So often it will be your senior team and your board and your colleagues and your peers. But it's also the other networks like your family, whatever your support networks are, make sure that you're drawing on them and keeping perspective. I would say this, but I actually think having a coach is a huge part of it, because it intentionally creates that space to think about what's going on and to focus on you, because it's very difficult to focus on you, I think. So there's something about keeping that perspective in that way. I think for me, the other thing is there's so much resource out there. So it's finding what works for you. But there are so many things that we know about human beings. I mean, I'm a psychologist. I know what's out there. Our knowledge about human beings and how the brain works and how that impacts and what we can do, what we can control, what we can't. great theories and models and tools that are out there. Access them, they're there. So, look for good evidence-based, research-based, not weird, quacky stuff, but there's really solid stuff out there. Find those and use what works for you. And talking. Just don't bottle it up. And I guess the other thing, we all need to do something to get that energy out that, I'm terrible for sitting at my desk all day, every day. I now absolutely have to make myself go for a walk every day. I plunge in the sea all year round. That's the thing that makes me feel good. So all those, being out in nature, all of those good things, whatever it is, it's being really intentional and really purposeful and very strict with yourself. That's what we hear people saying. I have to create that space, and I have to see that as part of my job.
Yeah. So linked to that, what qualities? I mean, it feels like maybe it's always felt like this, but the world is moving quickly. So what are the qualities that you think sector leaders need in today's world?
So I was thinking about this because, we know what a lot of the challenges are, and they're not going to go away. So that there's all of the things that are kind of obvious and I talked about all the time around, being a great leader. I think communication, you just can't overemphasize how important that is. So being aware of how you are communicating, how regularly, how you're engaging with people, how you are involving people. I think that's fundamental. That will never change. And then, there's all the stuff that we've all got to contend with in terms of cost of living crisis and the political environment and, digital and AI. We have to keep on top of all of this stuff. But when I was thinking about it, for me, it's about focusing on those leadership qualities. And some of the things that we've talked about already is about that piece about self-awareness and emotional intelligence and resilience and self-care. So actually, I think the thing for me that we need to keep our focus on, and we are in danger of not for lots of reasons, is actually developing our leaders and giving the time and the resource and the focus to that. Because if we don't have all of that, where does that leave us? Yeah. And I think that's a real risk and a real danger. And I think, finances make it very difficult, particularly the way things are. But I think that is just so important. So self-development.
How does an organisation identify and develop leaders?
Yeah, it's I talk from my own experience and from lots of conversations I've been having with people recently. I think in the sector we're not that great at focusing on, the skills and looking at what we need now and in the future, and then really being able to invest. I'm not necessarily talking about finances, because it doesn't always need lots of money being thrown at it, but giving the time and attention and focus on development, I think is probably one of our biggest challenges. So there's something for me about being able to really look at the skills and knowledge and positioning of the HR organisation development, learning and development functions in organisations that have them, and in organisations that don't, because a lot of, as we know, a lot of charities are so small, they don't have those functions, where they get that support from. So there's something for me about the expertise there and being able to invest in more of it, and then being able to focus on really identifying and planning for and developing those skills for now and the future. I think there's lots of great support out there. I think, I've already talked about CCE, where you and I first met. There's great providers out there. There's great coaches out there. There's lots of less expensive resources. So again, I think people are really generous with their time and their knowledge. It's out there. It's just being able to focus the time and resource, which of course doesn't include budget as well a lot of the time too.
You said a term earlier, which was coaching culture. And when I think, so blending the two again, but how does a leader of an organisation ensure that, A, there's a healthy culture generally, and also B, that there's a coaching culture amongst the team?
So we'll talk about a few things, and this is a conversation we could have probably for days and even weeks. So I think there's a really big piece in leadership around role modeling. So I think actually just acting out some of the behaviours that you want to see and being consistent and authentic and visible about them is just, you just can't put a price on that. The impact of that, because we all look at leaders, we've all got experience of great leaders and of poor leaders, and they are so visible. So if we see them behaving in a certain way, that is going to signal to us what this culture is about. And people will emulate that. People will copy that if it has a positive effect. So I think there's a huge piece about role modelling in there. I think there's something about just recognising that a leader isn't somebody who does everything. It's actually really a real challenge for people going to leadership roles, because a lot of time people go into leadership roles because they're great at their professional, their technical area. But actually being a leader is a different skill set. So, and we often see people in leadership roles, burning themselves out or getting themselves in a pickle or getting people disenfranchised or demotivated because they're trying to do everything. And I think that's a really important thing about leadership, is that actually we're not there to do it. We're there to take the vision and help people to get there, but it's empowering and enabling them to do it. They are the people who are doing it, and also understanding from them and involving them in the way forward. We don't come up with it all and take everybody there. We get that from other people. So I think that's a big element for me.
Yeah. That by the way was so huge. It was almost a 180 of, I think for a long time I was like, oh, I'll help you. Like I'll
of course.
Yeah. It's not to say you don't support somebody, but the shift from being hands-on to being like, how can we help you do this? I can't overstate how big of a deal that was in my own experience with leading a team, a small team, but also how much confidence and joy at work that brings to the people that you're working with. Huge, really huge.
Doesn't it just? And it's so hard.
Why is it so hard?
I think there's probably a number of reasons, and I think if I thought about it more, I'd come up with more. But I guess the one thing that springs to mind right now is that we want to help people. We really want to help people, and it just naturally we are drawn into that. Oh, I'll do it for you. But I'm sure there'll be lots of explanations for why that actually happens in terms of human behaviour in our brains. But we want to help. That's the first place that we go to, and it is much harder to actually sit back and coach people. To actually let people go, because it's about control. It's about letting go of control and giving it to other people. That's not something that comes naturally to us as human beings. It makes us feel like we are at risk. So it's not something that we do easily or naturally.
Yeah. In your experience, what differentiates leaders who inspire from those who manage? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. And, we explore it, don't we, on our programs about what's the difference between leading and managing. And generally we come up with there's a bit of both in both. And I think what people talk about when we ask about the difference, as a few examples, is what we've just talked about. That whole thing about it's less about doing, it's less hands-on, it's more about stepping back, it's more about inspiring and getting the best out of other people in terms of differentiating. But I would argue that actually a good manager does that too. It's also about recognizing when people do need more help and do need more hands-on. So there's different approaches, different styles that leaders need to deploy in different situations with different individuals. So there's something about recognizing what people need and applying that. So it's being, quite flexible in terms of our leadership style and our approach. I think what people talk about when we talk about the difference between management and leadership is there's much more about operationalizing stuff. So management is more about sort of planning and doing and structure and process, and leading is more about vision and taking people somewhere and inspiration. So I think that's some of the differences.
Yeah. I wondered if, well, let me just ask the question of all the models. So whether they're diamonds or they're circles that cross over, or they're the box that we mentioned, like of all of them, what sort of 3 models have been most impactful for you?
From me, okay. So I am answering the question, but I'm going to say one thing first, and I think we always talk about this, and I think this is a really important thing. Models are there as a help and a guide, but they're also there to be picked apart, and they're not panacea for everything. So I think, and a lot of models are, for me, the soundest models are ones that are built on research and evidence about what we know about human beings, and ones that have withstood the test of time and we know work. So there's something for me about, I'm a social scientist. I'm trained to critically think. I think you need to approach all of these with, there's a time and a place for some of them, and some of them are better than others. And a lot of them are actually rewriting of the same things that we know. That said, there's a few that I love. There's one, it's given a couple of different names and it's drawn from a couple of different sources, but it's Stephen Covey's circles, which I know we've talked about. So it's thinking about what do we have control over, basically, and what do we not have control over, and where can we influence things. So there are some things that we just absolutely can't change, world peace, stuff that I talked about before. This stuff that is easily within our grasp and we can change, and that's where we want to be focusing on. But also, where are the things that we can influence changing? We might not be able to change them, but could we influence them? Would it be about our approach to them, or would it be about us having a conversation with somebody that we're really struggling with and moving things along a little bit? So I love that model, and everybody I speak to and use that model with just thinks it's so basic and simple and helpful. So that's one. For me, this is another one, and this is it's a wonderful book, but it's an approach or a way of approaching conversations and human beings, and it's the quality of our actions basically relies on the quality of our thinking that we've been able to do beforehand. So it's all about giving people the space and time to think, which we just don't get. And it's the magic that happens when we give people that opportunity. So I've done some training using this approach. And sometimes I think it just sounds like feels like I'm not doing anything, because I'm actually sitting here with a person and I've maybe asked 1 or 2 questions and they've just talked. And then I have to remind myself you just cannot put a price on that, because what happens at the end of that session of somebody just thinking with somebody else is amazing. I'm seeing it happen to other people and experiencing myself. So that's another one. And then I think it's some basic neuropsychology, something that we know about humans that people just find really helpful, which we talk about as the amygdala hijack. So our brains are hardwired, our brains going back to prehistory when we were just still forming as beings. We have this little thing in our brain that overrides all of the amazing stuff that has grown over time, so our ability to think and reason and moderate our behaviours. If we are put into a fight, in a situation where we feel threatened, we'll have that fight or flight or flee instinct. And just reminding people that sometimes if you're in a situation where you've got some feedback coming, or you're feeling in conflict with somebody, or you see that happening to somebody else, and they explode or they behave in a really sort of unhelpful way or unexpected way, that's what's happening there. So I'm just reminded that that's actually our brains. It's not something necessarily to be scared of, and there's ways that we can manage it and there's ways that we can react to it. People find that so helpful. So those are three things that I love, that I just see are so beneficial and helpful to people.
Yeah. Just before so there's a couple of things one is before we get into the rapid sort of final round, let's continue going through your objects. But before we do the sort of final two objects, just you mentioned, so the Circles of Influence is Covey originally, is that right?
Yeah.
Who also wrote 7 Habits of Highly Effective
People, yeah.
So I'm not sure I've ever read the full book, but I have read the first chapter like 7 or 8 times. I was going to say 100 then, that was a bit dramatic. And it's one of the most memorable first chapters of a book I've ever read. Like I constantly tell this story. So I don't know if it was him or I can't remember if he's describing something.
Yeah.
But he's on a train, and I might get this wrong because it's been a while, but he's on a train. There are 2 kids on this full train carriage, sort of running around, throwing cans of Coke at people. It's probably not like this, but this is how I'm picturing it. You know, pulling on people's ties or whatever. And Stephen Covey goes to the father who's also on the train. It's like, come on, mate! Like there's a full carriage here. Can we sort of stop the children going nuts here? And he says, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't realise their mother was in the hospital and has just died, or something like that." And the point of this, I think, it's the first habit is that you have no idea what people are going through, and that is one of the most sort of memorable chapters of a book I've ever read, and that really resonates with what you said around. You just don't know what people are going through. I think that's really key. You don't. I think we put our own explanations and perceptions about why other people behave and what's happening in front of you, and we, like you say, we just don't know. I would say, I was thinking about this conversation and thinking about some of the things that really drive me, like my really deep underpinning values, and that is absolutely one of them. And it's really hard to remember that sometimes. It's really hard to keep that frame, but remembering that you just don't know. Yeah.
And having that frame, that different frame, or having that clarity, or even just keeping that question open, just really has an impact on the way that you approach relationships and other people.
Yeah. All right. Object number 2 and 3, and then we'll do a rapid fire round. So the point of the sort of object piece is, it represents something significant or meaningful in your journey. So what have we got?
Okay, I had it a moment ago. It's gone somewhere. Isn't that weird? I'll tell you what it is instead.
Yeah.
It's an elastic band. And the elastic band is, for me, about being a middle manager in an organisation. So a lot of that's drawing on my own experience of being in that position for quite a long time, and also my experience of working with people in leadership positions. It's such a tough place to be. And I think there isn't enough support and development in place for people in that position. So, we can get pulled this way, we can get pulled that way. And actually, there's a limit to the stretching. And I think that probably happened with me a little bit. I was too stretched in all these different ways. You're trying to support your team, you're trying to influence upwards, you're trying to work with other people across different functions. It's a really tough place to be. So the other bit for me in there is knowing your limitations and knowing when it's time to do something differently. Mm-hmm. So that imaginary elastic band, which was here in front of me, is one of them. And then the final one is, it's a wild turkey feather. And there's a lot of reasons why I've chosen this one. It's got lots of meaning for me. So this actually came from my dad's back garden. I grew up in Canada, and my dad lived out in the country in Ontario, and they had wild turkeys everywhere. And he collected them, and he gave them to me occasionally. So this partly represents sort of where I grew up, being out in the country in Ontario. Nature is a really big thing for me, as I've said already. Comes into my practice as a coach as well. And it also reminds me of my dad, who has I lost him a couple of years ago, but he was a big influence on me. He came from really, really humble, unique beginnings, living in a tiny little town in northern Ontario and working in a paper mill, and suddenly deciding one day that he was going to go to university, and it ended up, getting a PhD and being an engineer and having a really amazing career. So I got a lot from his experiences. He's influenced me a lot. And the other reason I love this is because I think feathers are just so cool. They are so delicate and beautiful and gentle and soft, but they're also so amazingly strong and resilient. And there's also all these tiny, they're barbs. I had to look up what they're called. So for me, it just represents, human beings. Like we said, there are so many facets of us that we just don't know and don't see on the surface. And it's just a helpful reminder about life and resilience and strength. So those are my bits.
It's amazing. All right, so we're in the final stretch. The rapid round. If you were starting a charity that's your own personal Lisa charity, who are you putting on your board of trustees? Maybe give me 3 people. Like what? I'm sort of getting into influencers and mentors. Maybe you've mentioned one, but who's on that board?
Okay. Oh gosh, wow. And I'm meant to be quick as well, aren't I, Dave? So, can it be anybody? Doesn't need to be anybody that anybody knows. So I have to say one of those people would be my sister, because she is the most self-aware, emotionally intelligent, resilient, kind, resourceful person I know. And I just think somebody like that, she brings so much into her decision-making. So I think for her decision-making and her empathy and care, I think I would want her on my board. I'm not going to name one, but I would probably choose one of my colleagues that I work with at the moment on leadership programs, because if I could have a combination of all of them, because again, they understand people. They are so good at challenge, which I think is such a difficult thing on boards. So being able to challenge effectively and with care, and with compassion, empathy, but actually with purpose. I think somebody who's good at challenge, one of those would be it. And I'm really struggling with the third one. I might have to come back to that in a second, if that's okay.
It can be a 2-person board for now.
It's a 2-person board then.
You, Vodafone, well, maybe not a specific brand, a phone company have come to you and said, Lisa, we've got an opportunity. We're going to let you send a text to every charity professional with an interest in development. So you've got the confines of a text message, however many characters. What are you saying to them all?
And it can be about what I'd like to see them focusing on.
Anything.
Yeah, okay. So it would be about find opportunities and space to have more courageous conversations and develop the skills and the awareness and the space to do that.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Lisa. This was an amazing conversation. Is there anything, before we wrap, that is sort of on your mind that you want to say at this point?
I suppose what I'd like to say to you, Dave, is I think this is such a great thing to be doing. I think the more conversations, the more opportunity there is to hear from people in leadership roles in our sector, and just to hear other people's stories. The power of stories and individual telling their stories is just amazing. So I think good on you for doing this, and I'm really looking forward to hearing more.
Amazing.
Thank you for asking me too.
No, brilliant. Thank you for coming on.
It's been a pleasure.
I would say that we haven't sort of spoken for a while, but the experience we had has really played out for me in many ways. So I'm very grateful for you coming on the podcast, but also the work before that as well.
And that makes everything just so worthwhile. Those hearing that is why I do what I do. It's just phenomenal. Thank you.